I got the request to talk about test anxiety. So today I wanted to talk about my experience with test anxiety and some things that I've done during my experience of medical school to get past it to some extent. What is test anxiety? Well, it's this sort of nervous feeling that you get before you take an exam and during an exam oftentimes, and it can lead you to performing less well on an exam than you otherwise would if you didn't have anxiety. It can come from a lot of different factors. It can come from lack of preparation or procrastination. It can come from perfectionism, from maybe a previous experience of failing, expectations from yourself or others, maybe time pressure if you are a slower reader. It can maybe come from ADHD or generalized anxiety. So there are a lot of different factors that can lead to somebody feeling like they have test anxiety. Yeah, I mean, my experience first started when I was in first grade, actually. We had these timed math tests where you were basically just adding and subtracting or multiplying. Actually, I don't think we were multiplying at that stage, but maybe we were. And I would just start hyperventilating. And my teacher actually sent me to the nurse. And looking back at this, it's so crazy that I was so nervous about these timed math tests. But prior to that, my cousin at the time was either applying to medical school or was already in medical school. And I just heard about how hard it is and how good of grades that you need to have in order to get into medical school. And I literally started putting pressure on myself as a first grader. Actually, so my husband and I were back home where I'm from, and we were out for this walk, and we ran into my first grade teacher. She recognized me and still knew me. I asked her if she remembered how nervous I would get during the timed exams, and she's just oh my goodness, I couldn't believe it. I'm so glad that you're okay in life. And I thought that was so funny, but I have become so much better at taking tests during medical school. I never thought I would be at the position where I am at, where I don't feel super anxious about tests and I'm able to perform my best on exams. So I'm going to take you through sort of some of the things that I have done. So one of the things with test anxiety is I developed this mindset where my anxiety is going to help me. It's okay that I feel anxious. I'm going to use this energy to focus, be able to go through things quicker, problem solve better, because stress can do that. Anxiety can do that. It can help you sort of zone in on things better. If you're curious, there's this book called The Upside of Stress by Kelly McGonigal. I read this a little bit later, but the application of stress being good can also be applied towards test anxiety. Another thing, just mindset, is knowing that you did the best that you could. So just sort of telling yourself, I did everything that I could possibly do to do well on this exam within the expectations of, we are all human. And of course we could always do better. Of course we could always work harder. Of course we could sleep less and do less fun things and work a ton more. But you don't want to do that because we are people and we need lives. But within the constraints, within the life that you have, just telling yourself that you did your best, I found that to be a helpful mindset for me. And then another mindset is just this perfectionism, teaching myself that it isn't necessary to score perfectly on every test. So it's okay that I don't score perfectly. It's okay that I don't get the best grades as I would like to, but it's okay if I don't. What's the worst that can happen if I get a B on this exam? I got a D on not my first exam in medical school, but one of my first pharmacology exams. Was it a D? Maybe it was a C. I feel like my school doesn't even have Ds. It was a 70%. And I still ended up with an A in the class because we had a lot of exams. But basically I didn't know that there was this, document that it was a practice exam that they sent out, and they accidentally sent out the practice exam to they said you could do that beforehand. So everybody who took that practice exam did really well. I don't want to say everybody, but a lot of people did really well because they knew the questions and the answers ahead of time. And I didn't even know about this, so I ended up doing really poorly. But the point of the story is you can always make a comeback. If you don't do very well, you can always make a comeback. People take the MCAT more than once. You can always come back. So letting go of this sort of perfectionistic view on testing is helpful because I learned that I can make mistakes and still come back from it and still do well. The next sort of phase I want to talk about is preparation. So some things that get people into anxiety mode is if you are procrastinating or not preparing well. What you need to do is you need to have a plan and you need to stick to your plan. Don't wait until the last minute to be studying if you can avoid that if you're an anxious person. It works for some people where they can study last minute and then take their exam and they do well. But if you're an anxious person and you have test anxiety, avoid doing that. Make sure you're prepared, because when you're prepared, you can go into an exam and be confident and be truly confident, not just like fake confident, but like truly confident. Like, I know my stuff. I'm doing the best that I can. I did the best that I can. So being prepared, having a plan. So for instance, when I was studying for step 2, I knew approximately how many questions I needed to go through each day on UWorld to achieve my goal of being done with UWorld by the end of rotations. And you know what I mean? Like I knew how many questions I needed to get through each day. Similarly, for shelf exams, I knew how many questions I needed to get through each day to finish all of the questions for that shelf exam material in UWorld before I took the shelf on top of like clinical mastery series forms. So I knew all of, I had everything sort of calculated out, and I just stuck with it. I'm not a person who likes to just study the last week. No, that doesn't work for me. I just, it's the long game for me, just a little bit every day, and that works a lot better for me than just like doing a whole bunch at the end. Besides, if I waited to do it all until the end, I would be thinking of it the other weeks. Like if I'm on family medicine and I wait until the last week of family medicine to actually study the material, the first 3 weeks I wouldn't be enjoying myself, because I'd be like, I should be studying for family medicine. So it doesn't work for me. If it works for you, keep doing you. Like, I never want to sway anyone from doing stuff that works for them. But if you have test anxiety, try not to procrastinate and try to be really prepared and have a plan and stick to your plan. Because I just found that sticking to my plan makes me feel confident inherently, because like I created a plan and I stuck with it. And there's a level of confidence that comes with that. Like, you start believing in yourself and trusting yourself because you do what you say you're going to do. And that's really helpful. Some research also suggested that people who have more of a surface level understanding of material are also more likely to have test anxiety. So I would encourage you, when you're studying, to be strategically studying. So when you're doing practice questions for maybe step 1 or step 2, know how to answer those questions, know what they're looking for, and really be strategic about it. And don't just like select an answer and like skim the explanation. No, like really know that stuff. Really know why the right answer is right, why the incorrect answers are incorrect. Like really know the stuff. And that way, when you get to the actual exam, you won't be thrown curveballs where you're not really sure what the answer, you know what I mean? Just like really know your stuff and be strategic about your plan, and don't avoid having a surface level understanding of things. You don't have to go like super deep where you're just like scouring the information on the internet about like diabetic foot ulcers, right? Like you don't have to like go super deep, but just like solid strategic knowledge for the exam. I found something that was helpful for me. I'm not sponsored on anything, but on Amboss, I buy like the library, the Amboss library, and you can look through and you can do high yield information. You can toggle this thing that gives you high yield information for any disease. So I sort of try to zone in on the high yield information. If I was looking something up in relation to a practice question I had gotten wrong, I would just sort of like do the high yield and stuff. And I try not to get too bogged down with too much information, because you can always do that later. But in medical school, you're in this like sort of time crunch. There's so much information. You could go so broad. You'd never have enough time to learn all the information there is in medicine. So just sort of zone in on the most important stuff. And then when you choose a specialty, someday you can really, really, really get into like the nitty gritty, like super fine details. But like now isn't the time. If you're struggling with test anxiety, you just got to be strategic and know what's important to know. And that comes through doing practice questions and understanding the practice questions really well. Okay, so when it comes to practice, this is my next sort of thing, practice. I grew up playing the violin, right, and tennis, and I learned that practice makes perfect, although that's somewhat a bad saying. One of my coaches was like, no, perfect practice makes perfect. And then I'm just like, no one's ever perfect. Nothing's ever perfect. So it sort of bugs me. But you got to practice, right? You got to practice. You got to put in the time. You got to do your practice questions and your practice tests. What I found to be really helpful was my medical school had a testing center, and we did a lot of tests, like so many exams during our first year and second year of medical school. And as much as I hated that, because not every medical school is like that, there was a silver lining, because I became really good at taking tests in testing centers. I became comfortable with, being in a cubicle, and I became comfortable with announcements that were made and the clock and just the system and not being on my laptop. And just like the whole thing, practice is really, really helpful. And just putting yourself in that situation. So if you can, which sometimes you can't control this. If you're already in medical school, you can't control how many tests you have or anything, but you do have the option of, like the different testing centers will allow you to take step 1 or step 2 at the testing center ahead of time. Well, not step 1 or step 2, but you can take like a practice form, like a practice test at the testing center. You have to pay for it, but at least you can get the feel of the testing center you're going to be taking your exam at. You can understand the breaks situation and what you have to write with, and like the calculator situation, and you can just really get a feel for all of that. And sometimes it's honestly just really helpful to know like where the bathroom is and what the locker situation's like and how much time does a break really feel like, and just sort of like simulating that. I didn't do this, but I knew of somebody who was doing it, or like someone's son at the apartment complex I was living at before, and they thought that this was really helpful. And I think it would be great if you don't have the opportunity to take a lot of exams while you're in medical school, to just be able to like go and take a test at a testing center and simulate your exam. Another thing that I want to talk about is like feeling time pressure. If you are feeling short on time, there could be a number of reasons that make you feel this way. I recently made a video about how I ended blocks with spare time, so check out that video if you notice it. But having a strategy and really knowing your stuff can make you a faster test taker. So this goes along with what I was saying before with preparation. So if you really know your stuff, you can take the test much more quickly because you already know what to look for. You can quickly diagnose things, and then you know what's next. That helps with the timing issue. Another thing could be reading speed. I don't honestly know how you get faster at reading. If you're slow at reading, maybe look something up for that, but I doubt you're slow at reading. If you're in medical school, I doubt you're slow at reading. You're probably just fine. But another thing that could leave somebody feeling like they don't have enough time is maybe if you have ADHD or something like that. So there's a plane. I would encourage you to go get help for that and see someone if you find yourself struggling with attention and like distractions and getting like caught off, like, you know what I mean? So that way, maybe if you're treated for ADHD, that could help you in completing your exams more quickly and not running out of time quite so easily. And then if you feel like you have, more time, then you're less likely to be anxious because, that time pressure can really make you feel anxious. Another thing to consider is the physical when it comes to anxiety. Mind your caffeine intake the day of your exam. So the day of my exam, usually I was maybe like a 2 coffee a day kind of gal, and I had 1 in a little bit the day of when I took step 2. The reason for this is like stress is just gonna like take you over the edge if you have too much caffeine and stress combined. So you can probably go a little bit lower on the caffeine on a test day. Play around with it, see how you feel. A while ago when I was going through grief counseling when I lost my dad, and we sort of talked about test anxiety a little bit as well, because I'm like, why not have a twofer if you're going to therapy anyway? So we talked a little bit about what you can do physically for anxiety before an exam. So there was this thing where she mentioned like tapping your feet, like back and forth, so bilateral tapping your feet before you take the exam. And somehow, I don't really know what the mechanism is, but even if it's placebo, I felt a little bit better when I did that. So sometimes I'll still do that. I'll also just clench my hand in my fist, like that. And that somehow just helps me get out some of the tension and whatnot. And just breathing, telling myself that this stress that I'm feeling is going to help me do my absolute best. I don't know. It definitely helps me out. So just focusing on those physical things right before you take the exam can be helpful. Some people find it helpful to exercise if you can. If you have an early exam, that might be harder. But just really being able to maybe get some of the stress out or do some of those exercises, maybe they're helpful for you. Finally, I would just encourage you, if you do find yourself struggling with potential distractibility or ADHD or perfectionism or fear of failure, I would encourage you to talk to somebody about it. Oftentimes it can be helpful to just sort of lay it out there, what you're going through, and sometimes there can be little easy changes that you can make to your mindset or your way of doing things that can help you come past test anxiety. For me, I would boil everything down to taking lots of tests and just getting better at tests in general, and then having a better preparation strategy. I think that's what helped me with my test anxiety the most, was just practice. Honestly, just practice. And yeah, I hope that this can be helpful for you. I don't know if it is, but I did used to really struggle with anxiety before tests and during tests, and I would run out of time and be so distracted when people were standing up and leaving and just being oh my gosh, I only have 1 minute left and I have so many questions left. I don't feel like that anymore. I finish tests like usually with time to spare, and I feel anxious, like a little bit anxious before I take tests, but I feel like confident, and the anxiety goes away as soon as I start taking the test now. So if you are worried that you're never going to get to that place, I do speak from experience that it is possible. And the way that I did that is honestly through practice. And yeah, I hope that this can be helpful, and I hope it gives you a little bit of hope that you can get past test anxiety and things can get better with time. Just be patient with yourself and really work at it. And yeah, treat yourself with kindness, and yeah, things can get better. Leave me a comment below if you have any further questions, and leave a like and consider subscribing if you would like to see more videos from me. All right, we'll see you in the next video.